It's that time of year. Twice a year, the state of Ohio says that school districts are required to prepare a 5-year forecast, basically looking long range. They use that to see if districts are struggling and in trouble so they can reach out. On our forecast, we're just talking about the general fund with the exception to the first year of actual information that we had the Ed Jobs Fund, and that will go off next year. The forecast is a working document. New information becomes available all the time. Looking at revenue, our real estate taxes from the May forecast really did not change much. We're going to see anywhere from 2 to 4% increases in our valuation with updates and appraisal, and basically flat growth in between those cycles. Looking at tangible personal property, the biggest changes in this forecast have to do with our tangible personal property. One, the valuation itself. We had expected the enterprise pipeline to come through this calendar year, and it did come through. However, what they're carrying in the lines is considered a derivative and non-taxable. So I had to back $13 million of valuation off the tangible personal property. Now that's not dollars because we don't collect on the full valuation, but that did have an impact on our forecast. And then on the direct reimbursement from them phasing the TPP out, and we were worried about this in this last budget bill, of what they would do. They were holding it flat, and they are going to go ahead and phase that down. And what that means for us is we received approximately $1.8 million in TPP direct reimbursement. We'll receive half that this year, or approximately $900,000, and then next year it goes to zero on out into the forecast. So we kind of knew that that was a possibility, and it did happen. There has been some legislation passed, I think it was just today, actually will not help us. It goes into next year's reimbursement on those districts. I think they're more that had like emergency levies and those types of things. So if you hear about that legislation, it will not affect our numbers. The school district income tax continues to be a strong source of our revenue. The revenue increased 3.3% last year, and we're projecting 2% going out, to be a little conservative. We'll wait till those numbers come in. At the end of this week, we'll actually receive another quarter's allocation, so we'll see how that comes in. Looking at our unrestricted grants and aid, this is our per pupil funding from the state. We are receiving the capped amounts of 7.5% each year, and that's helping offset some of the loss in TPP that we were worried would happen. And it's kind of unheard of, but we're projecting 5% increases for fiscal year 18 and beyond. I mean, a decade ago, you were lucky, you know, if you got 2 or 3%, and so we've been fortunate that we are receiving those increases. Although if the formula was completely working, we would be funded several $1 million more each year, but the way that it currently works, we are kind of capped at what the legislature sets. Restricted grants and aid, that remains the same. That's our career tech and economic disadvantage funding. It really didn't have much of a change since May. Other revenue, the biggest thing affecting this year is we have 2 periods of back funding from the change in Medicaid program. We are expected to receive both of those. They're each about a little over $200,000 each this fiscal year. Again, that's one time kind of getting caught back up money, and we'll see when that hits. They really don't have a determined schedule for it. Looking at expenditures, not a lot of detail here I'm going to go into. Basically, we use the foundation of the appropriation amendment that was approved last month. Going forward, as far as salaries, the number of pays in between the fiscal year does have some effect. So if you're looking across the forecast and you see kind of some jumps up and down, last year we had 25 pays. This year we have 26 pays. Next year, we have 27 pays and then back to 26. So to capture those within the fiscal year causes some fluctuation. Next slide. Last year, we did skip a textbook adoption, so you'll see an increase in this category for that. And then we instituted our capital plan last year. One of the biggest things not happening this year but next year is a robotics program for the career tech program, so that's budgeted in there. And then looking at the numbers as far as the percentage, our revenues, we did have a 1% shift to the state. Locally, our revenue is at 50%, the state at 45%, and miscellaneous 5%. And on the expenditure side, our salaries and benefits remain at 73%. They've been at that percentage the last 2 fiscal years. And then you can see our purchase services at 15%. That would be our utilities, our community school, our open enrollment deductions, postage, those kind of things. And then materials and supplies at 5%, and those would be our textbook, library books, instructional supplies. Then looking historically from fiscal year 11 through the end of the forecast of fiscal year 20, you can see the beginning of the far left. The revenues remain fairly flat until House Bill 59 with a new funding formula. And then you'll see it dip, and that is because the income tax renewal cannot be counted as revenue until it's successfully passed. So hopefully next week we'll have good news, and then I'll revise the forecast and we'll see that number more steady. On the expenditure side, expenditures have risen over time, and then the implementing of our capital spending plan, putting that money aside so that we can repair roofs and buy technology and that kind of thing. And what does this do to our cash balance? You can see over time we start eating into our cash balance. A deficit funding begins next year, and then you can see we cannot sustain our operations without the renewal of the income tax. We're deficit in 2020. Items that could affect the forecast would be the next budget bill. We have the Perkins grant, which is a federal grant. It's set to expire in 2016. We're hopeful that it will be extended. And talking to Anthony Knickerbocker, he thinks maybe we'll have maybe a 2 or 3 year extension, and maybe we'll get some information on maybe how we can do those funds. It brings in about $108,000. It supplements the program, so it's not insignificant. And then, of course, the passage of our income tax renewal has a significant effect on the forecast. And then we remain talking about healthcare reform and the Cadillac tax in fiscal year 24. If we don't modify our plans, the Cadillac tax will be $1.3 million a year. So clearly that's not something we want to have happen. And in summary, based on the forecast, pending no changes in assumptions, which we know there will be, the district will end fiscal year 20 with a cash deficit of a little over $13.3 million. As we know, the income tax expires. We're on the ballot. And in March 2010, we passed an operating fund cash reserve policy. And based on this forecast, no actions required at this time. And that's my forecast. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Julie. Very good.
Just wanted to clarify the tangible personal property tax. When the district was fully collecting that many years ago, that was $6-7 million annually, and we're down to 1.5 this year.
On this forecast, we were fully funded in 2004, and then they started phasing it out. I don't have that number in front of me, but yes, it was significant at one time.
Right. And that's going away next year.
And the hold harmless direct payments were at that 2004 level. However, those have went away too. So yes, over time, it's had a significant impact on our revenue stream.
So, well, we've got some good news. There's some bad news too.
Hopefully there's some good news to offset some of the bad news.
Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you.